All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. In this episode, Brian brings us the weekly update on Palestine and solidarity struggles with Palestine. And as far as labor news, I will be covering the following. We're going to be talking about Korean bus drivers going on strike in Seoul. We're going to talk about train workers and airport workers reaching agreements after months of strikes in Germany. Salem-Keizer education workers appear to have averted a strike in Oregon. The union at City Brewing Company has authorized a strike. They're members of the Teamsters union in Wisconsin. And finally, Waffle House workers in Georgia have gone on strike, as well as Boston University graduate students. So we're going to cover all those stories in depth. Here are some of the headlines that didn't make it this week that we encourage you to seek out and get more information if you would like. The first is how Chicago Park District union workers authorized a strike, and they're with SEIU Local 73. You can find that article in the Chicago Sun-Times, March 26th. The United Auto Workers put out a press release saying it stands in solidarity with striking Tesla workers in Sweden. You can find more information on that in the news section of the United Auto Workers, uaw.org. The Teamsters put out a press release announcing that Amazon Teamsters are extending their strike to LA County. And you can find that also on the Teamsters website. Aramark workers in Philadelphia overwhelmingly voted to authorize the strike at Wells Fargo Center. You can find that in CBS News, March 25th. What I liked about that article also is that it makes reference to the union's worker-led negotiating committee. Also in the news, UE Local 1186 at Willie Street Co-op in Madison, Wisconsin. They won their first contract. You can find more information on that at facebook.com/Willie Street 1186. I also came across an article, an opinion piece in commondreams.org titled "What Argentina's Workers Can Teach the World About Resisting the Far Right," which I think is a valuable article worth people's time. And finally, as I mentioned, uninstructed is on the ballot in Wisconsin for April 2nd. This is an opportunity to send a clear message to the White House that Wisconsin voters do not consent to U.S. complicity and genocide against Palestinians. So go ahead and get your vote out on that. And as always, we like to kick things off with a little bit of culture, a little bit of music, sometimes a little bit of poetry. This week, we've once again chosen Mr. Charles Mingus, bass player extraordinaire, jazz composer extraordinaire, human being extraordinaire. This song is called Haitian Fight Song. And if I'm not mistaken, several years ago I was driving in my car in Denver listening to this song being played on local radio, and the DJ explained that Charles Mingus channeled the energy of a prayer into the solo of this song. So our thoughts are with Haiti right now, certainly, as it experiences some particularly turbulent times, and we wanted to keep Haiti on the map by sharing this song. So this is Haitian Fight Song by Mr. Charles Mingus.
Hello, listeners. We have news from the Palestine Chronicle, and later on, as we've been reporting, we'll have some other news from Labor for Palestine. But we'll kick it off here with Palestine Chronicle news. The Gaza famine is spreading in the besieged Gaza Strip as Israeli forces continue to carry out massacres targeting Palestinians awaiting humanitarian aid. The U.S. president, who the Palestinian movement has designated as genocide, Joe Biden, has secretly authorized billions of dollars in new fighter jets, bombs, and other war materials, including 2,000 and 500-pound bombs that are used to level entire blocks in occupied Gaza, which are war crimes. There's been no public notice of this by the Biden administration. In other news from the Palestine Chronicle, on March 28th, Palestinian youth, descendants of Holocaust survivors, doctors, and climate activists disrupt the biggest fundraiser in the history of the Democratic Party at the NYC's iconic Radio City Music Hall in Manhattan, calling on Biden to stop arming apartheid Israel. The event, organized by the Democratic Party, took place at the Music Hall on Thursday evening last week and raised a record-breaking $25 million, according to reports. And numerous disruptions in solidarity with Palestine took place at that event, as well as thousands protested outside in the streets. Thousands of people gathered on Saturday, March 30th in downtown Seattle, Washington, to commemorate the 48th anniversary of Palestinian Land Day. Similar protests and rallies were held across numerous cities and in the United States and around the world. Several Palestinians were killed and wounded yesterday, March 30th, as the Israeli army again targeted hundreds of people who were waiting for aid trucks southeast of Gaza City. Forced famine by the U.S. and Israel is setting in, and aid agencies worldwide are demanding an immediate end to the genocide and blockade on Palestinians and immediate lifting of the blockades of humanitarian assistance. As we report here on We Rise Fighting, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of trucks being prevented entry by the U.S. and Israel into Gaza to relieve the famine that's taking place. We demand that this be lifted immediately and the trucks and other assistance be allowed in. Similar demands are happening worldwide, according to the Palestine Chronicle, by Cuba's president and other national leaders around the world who are calling on the international community to take action to end the genocide in Gaza. On March 30th, Cuban President Diaz-Canel said, quote, "As long as Palestinian land continues to be martyred, bled, destroyed to its foundations by the hatred of the Israeli occupier, we cannot tire of denouncing the crime and calling on the international community." President Miguel Diaz-Canel has been one of the leaders voicing the strongest opposition to Israel's ongoing onslaught on Gaza and has consistently expressed his support and the Cuban people's support for Palestine. And as we've been reporting here on We Rise Fighting, much of our news with unions and labor comes from Labor for Palestine, and that's true again today. We note there will be a Labor for Palestine delegation at the Labor Notes Conference, April 19th to the 21st in Rosemont, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. If you're interested in that delegation, you can contact Labor for Palestine at info@laborforpalestine.net. That's info at laborforpalestine.net or laborforpalestine.us@gmail.com. Also, as we reported last week, we here at We Rise Fighting believe that this statement is of critical importance to all unions worldwide, but especially in the United States. And this is the statement that was issued entitled On International Workers' Day, Urgent Appeal from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions. That statement is available on laborforpalestine.net, and the Palestinian union members are asking that to be circulated widely within unions and with members across the United States in particular and all across North America and the world. There are many asks within that statement, and for more expanded of that, you can check out that website, laborforpalestine.net. And on our last episode, we read the statement in its entirety. Next up, House Committee seeks details on Gaza's ceasefire vote. They are members of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, Local 2325 at the Legal Aid Society, picketed outside of their downtown Manhattan offices in New York City. This week, the ALAA refused to comply with a congressional subpoena related to members' vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in December. In a report from Duncan Freeman of The Chief, posted on March 28th, Freeman states or writes, a United Auto Workers local representing public defenders in New York declined to comply with a congressional subpoena this week, arguing in a letter to the House of Representatives committee that its demands exceed its jurisdiction and threaten workers' free speech rights. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, a Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, subpoenaed the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, Local 2325, on March 11th for information regarding a vote that ALAA members took in December on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Fox initially requested a bevy of information on matters related to the resolution in a January letter to ALAA's president, Lisa Atta. When the union failed to respond to the request, Fox subpoenaed the union. In conjunction with lawyers from the New York Civil Liberties Union, the union on Monday responded to Fox, writing in a letter that it objects to the subpoena and that Fox's requests for information were vague and overbroad. Quote, the ALAA and Ms. Atta object to the subpoena on the ground it exceeds the lawful and legitimate jurisdiction of the committee, the response reads. Quote, the committee's true interest in this matter arises out of the committee's hostility to the content of the ALAA resolution, which not only renders the subpoena beyond the committee's legitimate authority, but also violates the United States Constitution. In a statement, Leah Duncan, the ALAA's financial secretary-treasurer, wrote that the union stands behind its resolution and the process that led to its passage. Duncan states, quote, we are proud to be part of the growing movement of unions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. We continue to condemn all forms of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and reject the harmful rhetoric that conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Our membership will not be intimidated into abandoning our core principles, including advancing the interest of working people worldwide, by this blatant attack on organized labor. The ALAA represents more than 2,700 workers at the Legal Aid Society, Neighborhood Defender Service, and other legal service providers. And we'll have updates here on these developments at We Rise Fighting. Next up, we have Stop Genocide protest at the U.S. naval ship, which was named Harvey Milk in San Francisco. Yes, you heard that right, listeners. The U.S. Navy named one of their ships after the great leader, people's leader, Harvey Milk, in San Francisco. The newly commissioned U.S. naval ship, Harvey Milk, was in San Francisco for a reception by former Congress leader Nancy Pelosi and San Francisco Mayor London Breed. And this is a report from laborforpalestine.net. Both support continued U.S. Pelosi and Mayor London Breed both support continued U.S. military and economic aid to apartheid Israel and the continued genocide by the Zionist government. Protesters opposing genocide in Gaza rallied outside the gate, and others tried to board the ship to stop it from sailing, with many anti-apartheid protesters arrested. And our last item for this episode, listeners, in Detroit, May 24th to the 26th this year, 2024, there will be a People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit, Michigan. That's May 24th to the 26th. People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit, Michigan. The call is at the website, peoplesconferenceforpalestine.org. That's one word, peoplesconferenceforpalestine.org, and also at hashtag People's Conference for Palestine. The call reads, and it goes into some depth, but a short bit of the statement reads, the Palestinian people have been fighting for liberation for over 100 years and are committed to continuing this fight generation after generation until victory. Join us at the conference as organizations, collectives, movement leaders, community members, students and intellectuals, artists and cultural workers, and activists for a 3-day convening to reflect, exchange, and strengthen ourselves in our fight for a free Palestine. This moment calls on us to deepen our relationships, our strategies, our tactics, and our unity for the struggle ahead. Through panels, workshops, exhibitions, and cultural performances, this conference will be an opportunity to come together and build upon this critical juncture in our struggle through education and advancing popular consciousness. So again, that conference is May 24th to the 26th in Detroit. Listeners can go to peoplesconferenceforpalestine.org and hashtag People's Conference for Palestine. Registration information is there, as well as housing information and information on how to contact the organizers for that event. All right, now we're going to hand it over to Rick here, who's going to talk about some union struggles going on.
Right on. Thank you, Brian. And today we're going to kick it off in Wisconsin, actually. The headline on a News 8 article reads as follows. Union at City Brewing Company approves strike authorization, rejects 12-hour shifts. So again, as we've stated multiple times on this show, a union approving a strike authorization, that doesn't mean they're going on strike. That just means that they're giving their leadership the authorization to call a strike if and when necessary. Just wanted to make that distinction always. And the article reads as follows. The Teamsters union at City Brewing Company in La Crosse has the option to go on strike in May if a new contract is not agreed upon. According to sources within the Teamsters Local 695, a 2-day vote this week saw overwhelming support to authorize a strike. The union's contract with the brewery is up May 8th. Over 400 members voted on 2 measures, one authorizing a strike and another gauging whether members approve of the implementation of 12-hour workdays. Now, I went ahead and highlighted that in this article, the 12-hour workdays, just because, in my reading of labor history and my reading of labor theory, one of the writers that I've read a lot of has been Karl Marx. And one of the arguments that Marx puts out there is when talking about labor and when talking about the labor movement and the labor struggle, Marx breaks it down to this. He's like, ultimately, it's a struggle about time. Time. It boils down to that, So I learned that many years ago, and I've always, put it to the test here in these labor circles, and it's held water. And I just wanted to share that with listeners in case y'all also find it insightful and you want to go out and apply and see how this shakes out in your life and your understanding of this world around us. But it certainly has helped me understand the world that I see here in labor, because 12-hour days? No, absolutely not. The article continues. The brewery indicated to employees that they plan to move to a 24/7 production schedule, which would include shifting many positions to an quote-unquote alternative work schedule that would include a move to 12-hour shifts between 3 and 5 days per week based on need. All right, so absolutely not. I would also be quite angry at that. According to the brewery, they are currently in early stage negotiations with the union on reaching a new deal before the current contract expires. No official tally from the union has been shared. News 8 now will share those numbers once they are available. All right, moving on to international news. And actually, I got a few articles that speak to international news this week. The first one, the headline reads as follows, and it's from foxnews.com World Reports. Deutsche Bahn top train drivers union reach agreement after months of strikes. Now, this is something that we've been following, and that you can go through our archives, see what else we've covered about the Deutsche Bahn struggles. But in this article, reads as follows. Germany's main railway operator, the union representing many of its train drivers, have reached a deal in a long dispute over working hours and pay that was marked by a string of strikes, the union said Monday. See, that's why I shared the thing that I shared before. Working hours and pay, working hours and pay. Those two are inseparable, but it's working hours, it's time. It's time. I'm telling you, just go ahead and test it. Don't leave it to me. That's not the spirit of the dialectic here. The article continues. Neither the GDL union nor state-owned railway operator Deutsche Bahn gave details of their agreement. Both scheduled separate statements on Tuesday. So we hope to have a follow-up on this next episode. GDL called drivers for Deutsche Bahn out on strike repeatedly in the dispute, which has dragged on for months. It was the most consistently disruptive of several pay disputes in the transport sector that have coincided recently. Others have involved local transport workers, ground staff, and cabin crew for Lufthansa and the airport security staff. The main sticking point was GDL's demand for working hours to be reduced from 38 to 35 hours per week without a pay cut. Some smaller private operators that operate regional services agree to the demand. See, again, they're fighting for less hours, equal pay. Again, it's a struggle for time. It wasn't immediately clear how GDL and Deutsche Bahn resolved the issue, according to the article. Next up, a Reuters article that reads as follows. Lufthansa reaches agreement with union over ground staff pay. Lufthansa is another bit of news that we've been following, a bit of worker struggle that we've been following from Germany, the airline. And this is from Reuters. This is March 27th. German airline Lufthansa on Wednesday said it had reached an agreement with Union Verdi on a pay raise for its 25,000 ground staff after weeks of wage dispute and strikes that have left thousands of passengers stranded across Germany. The union has been demanding 12.5% pay increases for approximately 25,000 employees for 12 months, in addition to an inflation compensation bonus of 3,000 euros. Lufthansa offered around 10% pay increase for 28 months, in addition to an inflation bonus. Okay, well, hats off to the Lufthansa workers who carried out that struggle. I hope that 10% pay increase is, within the realm of reason for them. But that's the news and the update that we have for them. Another news update comes from at the education sector. We reported on this last week. So Salem-Keizer teachers were poised to go on strike last week. We talked about that for a hot minute. And this week, this article from opb.org, the headline reads as follows. Salem-Keizer teachers reach tentative deal, avert potential strike. After nearly a year of bargaining, educators reached a tentative agreement with the district on a new 2-year contract. Salem-Keizer Public Schools seem poised to follow Portland's historical teacher strike from November with one of their own this spring. But that changed early Tuesday morning when Salem-Keizer Education Association reached a tentative agreement with district administrators, wrapping up about 11 months of bargaining in the state's second largest school district. The deal still has to be ratified, but for now, this means Salem teachers won't go on strike. The association represents more than 2,600 licensed employees, including teachers, nurses, and counselors who serve more than 40,000 students at 65 schools. So that would have been a huge disruption. Union members authorized a strike last week, but hadn't finalized a start date. Now, I just went ahead and highlighted that because when I read that they hadn't finalized a start date, Brian, I don't know about you, but I immediately put myself in the head of an administrator or in the head of a boss, and hearing that they hadn't finalized a strike date, that to me is like hearing that the boogeyman is coming for me. Like not knowing what the strike date is or how to prepare. How are you going to prepare your contingency plan if you don't have a start date for the strike? How do you know whether or not to hire replacement workers if you don't have a finalized start date? All that goes out the window and you don't know what you're fighting. And that to me definitely stood out. So I had to highlight that they hadn't finalized a start date for their strike. The article continues. Both sides have repeated over the last several months that they wanted to avoid a strike if possible. Class size and the question of how to define a full-time employee were central issues in the final days of mediation. Again, how to define a full-time employee. The struggle is about time. All right. The article also states the union was able to negotiate language that clarified everyone's understanding of full-time positions and placed more of a priority on class size ratio, particularly in elementary schools. The article then offers a quote from the board members, which reads as follows. Oregon districts are struggling to hold the financially and educationally unsustainable conditions at bay. Schools serve everyone, and as Oregon's school systems begin to stagger under an ever-accumulating weight, catching them is everyone's responsibility. That line also really caught my attention, because when we here on this show talk about building a new world from the shell of the old, I mean, let's read this article in its totality. These teachers are fighting for a contract which would determine what a full-time employee is, the wages of those people, the class sizes, things like that. Like the union contracts, I mean, these could be part of building a new world from the shell of the old, at the very least, in letting people know that we know how to do this. We know how to administer our public services, put it in writing, and carry it through. And we also know how to converge and discuss and debate and negotiate and things like that. So yeah, this just kind of gives me hope in that idea and just captured that idea right there for a second. According to the union, educators will be invited to informational town halls in the coming weeks to learn specific details about the contract and then vote on ratification. A timeline for member ratification has not been set yet. The tentative agreement must be ratified by union members, then by the school board before taking effect. Okay, and finally, oh no, we're still going after this one, actually. We got one more after this one, but this next one is South Korean bus drivers return to work after strike causes rush hour chaos. This is an article from Al Jazeera, and again, this is coming from South Korea. Seoul Bus Labor Union agrees to 4.48% wage rise to return to work. Thousands of bus drivers in South Korea's capital of Seoul have returned to work hours after launching a strike that caused chaos for rush hour commuters. All right, so this is saying hours after they went on strike. I just want to keep that context because they're talking about a 4.48% wage increase, and that's just hours after going on strike. The Seoul Bus Labor Union on Thursday agreed to a 4.48% wage rise plus $480 in holiday bonuses. The Seoul city government said nearly 12 hours after the industrial action disrupted almost all bus routes in the capital. All right, the breakthrough cleared the way for the resumption of bus services ahead of the evening rush hour. Drivers began the strike, the first since 2012, at about 4 a.m. on Thursday after employers failed to agree to their demands for a 12.7% increase in hourly pay. Now, I did catch the gap between the 12.7% they had originally demanded and the 4.48% that they received. I'm not sure what to think about that, of course. I haven't been in communication with the union or exactly what caused that discrepancy there. But I am reading that they did get a 4.48% wage increase in a matter of 12 hours because thousands of bus drivers took direct action in Seoul, in the capital of Korea. So that got them those goods at the very least. So hats off to the bus drivers in Seoul for carrying that out. And again, part of the reason that we cover international news is because there's stuff out there that we can learn from. There's stuff out there that can inspire us and give us ideas. When we report about doctors going on strike in Africa, you don't hear about doctors going on strike too much in the US. But that also, they're just reminders. They're reminders that, hey, you too can go on strike. You don't need the permission of the bosses or the state or the National Labor Relations Board if you can get away with it. So that's part of why we report on this sort of thing. And finally now, this time for real, there's an article that's called Who's on Strike in the US? And this is coming from nerdwallet.com. Now, I've shared from this article before, earlier in the year, and it just keeps getting updated periodically. So these were this week's updates, and I was excited to hear about this first one. There's two updates. The first one reads as follows. On March 26th, unionized Georgia Waffle House workers, Waffle House workers went on strike in protest of the company's nationwide policy of deducting $3 from workers' pay each shift for a meal credit. Get this. The credit is deducted even if an employee doesn't have a meal during their shift. The Union of Southern Service Workers estimate the policy deducts $30 million from workers' pay each year. The workers are also demanding 24/7 security and a wage increase to $25 per hour for all workers. $25 an hour. Yeah, $25 an hour for Waffle House workers? Yes. And you know what? It's refreshing to hear that. It's refreshing to hear that when, we've been hearing $15 an hour since like 2009. It's refreshing to hear unions put $25 an hour as a minimum, as a starting. So hats off to Georgia Waffle House workers. And finally for tonight, the last little bit of news, also coming from that same article, Who's on Strike in the US, is on March 25th, members of the Boston University Graduate Workers Union went on strike after 8 months of negotiation with the university. The union, which formed in 2022, has more than 3,000 members, argues that the university has dragged its heels in negotiating the workers' first contract. You can find more information on that struggle on the Boston University Graduate Workers Union Facebook page, which is facebook.com/SEIU509. That's the letters SEIU509. And that's all we have this week for you. We covered some national news. We covered some international news. As always, very important. We thank you, listeners, always for listening. If you like what you hear on this show, please go ahead and subscribe, like, share, talk about whatever it is you do. But we do appreciate you listening, and we send love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone.